Hello, welcome to The Intersect, where academia, industry, and the DoD meet. I'm Matthew Butkovic. Today I'm joined by my colleague, Craig Lewis. Craig, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure to be with you, Matt.
Craig, you are the IT director
Yes.
for the SEI, and all the great work that we do here in the SEI in software engineering and cyber and AI is underpinned by technology. So your role is a really important one here. So I was hoping to give the audience just a brief overview of your responsibilities and maybe the composition of your team.
Yeah, sure. As the director of information technology, we're responsible for, as you said, supporting all of the great research that happens here. So it's really a foundational layer that we're providing cloud, basic network access, of course, supporting the business systems, talent management, all of those sorts of things in addition to the researchers. So there's really a wide breadth of skills that are necessary for the people on the team, high expectations, but also high reward too. So it's great to be a part of and contributing to all of that great work that happens. In some sense, we're part of all of those teams as well. So we celebrate all the successes that happen here.
Your team's always been a great partner with our team, so I thank you for the support and collaboration that you show us. I usually ask folks what their path to the SEI was, how they ended up in any role here at the SEI. Would you mind sharing some of your background?
Oh, absolutely, Matt. So I was at the National Eye Institute at the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland, prior to coming to the SEI. One of the things I really enjoyed about being there was that there were brilliant people from all over the globe who came to the Eye Institute to conduct research, cutting-edge research, and apply that in a clinical setting. So there was the back-end research, and that's where I spent most of my time, but there was also a clinical setting as well. So clinical trials and putting that science into practice, and then that informing the research that would happen in the back in the labs as well. It's very, very interesting to me. And I mentioned that at the SEI, one of the things I enjoy is kind of being part of the team, in essence, or one cog in the wheel that supports all of that great work. I really felt that there as well. And that's one of the things that actually drew me to the SEI, is that there were those kinds of opportunities at the SEI to be part of something bigger, that technology was an enabler for great research.
Yeah, that's really interesting to say that. So you're describing in a past role, you were supporting applied research that was very important. And the same really goes here, right? That we do work that's important for the defense of the country in support of our DoD sponsors. One of the items that you and I were discussing before we started was the idea of the teaching hospital, that we have the ability to not only just utilize IT for the core services that we require, but also as a way to accelerate and maybe validate some of our research. So curious about your thoughts about the role of IT in that sort of, for want of a better term, teaching hospital capacity.
Yeah, absolutely. So take, for example, network data. So synthetically generated or artificial data can only take you so far. So in some of the research that happens, it's interesting for our researchers to see, well, what happens on a real production network? It's not the biggest network in the world. We're a somewhat small organization, but there are interesting things that happen on our network because of the nature of the work that we do, the smart people on it. So it's nice to be able to provide that kind of real world laboratory in a sense. So people can take some ideas, hone those ideas, see how it works in a small but interesting network. And in many times that informs us as well. So we would like to think that we know our network, right? That's one of this kind of core tenets of network operation, know your network. That can sometimes be challenging. And having an extra set of eyes, people developing tools that give additional insights that we in IT operations didn't have previously, can be very beneficial to us as well.
Yeah, I think it must be a challenge having a user base that are, right, the focus is technology. So folks that either fancy themselves experts or are legitimate experts in tech makes for a very challenging environment. And then we have the kind of the added challenge of doing research that sometimes makes us push the boundaries of certain security techniques or software engineering techniques. Just wondering, sort of comparing, contrasting what it was like in your prior role supporting researchers in eye health and research, and supporting folks that are doing cyber, software engineering, and AI.
Well, in some sense, there are a lot of similarities in those environments. So at the National Eye Institute, someone may have brought in some new equipment and it's connected to some microscope and you don't know how it works, but they just spent a lot of money on it and it's do some great research and you have to figure it out. So there's a lot of learning on the fly. There's a lot of your boundaries being pushed and you have to know it. And in a way that challenge can be fun. There, of course, constraints on your time and your knowledge, and sometimes you have to leverage resources and engage others in the community who have maybe seen this problem before you. So having those kinds of use cases, under your area of responsibility forces you to grow.
Yeah, you mentioned sort of being part of this system, right? So in the case of the Eye Institute, of the ecosystem of researchers. Well, here we're part of the ecosystem of researchers, but also part of an ecosystem of defense industrial base partners for the DoD. So I know one of your roles where we often intersect is in that role of defending and protecting sensitive information. So Craig, thoughts about your role, our role in the defense industrial base, and how we can maybe join the conversations. How can we maybe make better or more rapidly prototype things that protect the DIB in our respective roles?
Well, that's an interesting question, Matt, and there are so many facets to that. I think one of the biggest ones is that collaboration. Getting involved with other people in the space. One of the things that makes the SEI so interesting is this blend of academia, but it's not purely academic.
Right.
We're not necessarily educating students like another department on campus, but we have that education feel, that heritage. We're also government-like in the sense that our main customer is often the Department of Defense. And that informs some of our work and our research initiatives. It's a little bit business as well. So it's all of these things coming together. And it's great that we can take this long history of research that's been done. Take, for example, insider threat. You've previously spoken with Dan Costa in a previous Intersect. Dan is fantastic, and he has shared with us some of the things that they've learned, some of the lessons learned from this long history of collecting insider threat information. And then we in the IT organization think, well, how does this expose maybe some blind spots to us? We think that we're trying to cover all of our bases, but are we? Let's see what real malicious IT insiders have done and try to protect ourselves from that, some lessons learned base. And then that university heritage comes out to say, well, these insights that we've gained, it's part of our mission, it's part of our DNA to get this out and to share. So bringing it back to the DIB, the goal is to bring the tide up to raise all boats, right? So rather than one individual member of the defense industrial base being attacked and then an adversary taking that same thing and attacking company B and company C, if we can all get together and learn, we all benefit. So coming back to the insider threat, all right, well, we've done this. We've taken a look. Let's tell some other people how to look for malicious IT insiders or how to look for whatever that we may have learned by collaborating with our internal researchers, right? So we can take these lessons learned and share them. In those conversations, we get back. So sharing is not a one-way street. You develop relationships. Those people become sounding boards. They inform what you're doing. They give you additional perspectives. So it's really this constant feedback loop of things we're learning, between our groups, for example.
Right.
Things we're learning from the DoD, who's telling us, here's what we're seeing from our massive network that will help you protect yours. Here's what we're learning from all these other companies. So that this constant exchange of information is always helping to push people forward. It's keeping things fresh. So you're not just doing the same thing that you did 5 years ago to protect your network. The world's different now.
Yep.
So you have to kind of look present and look forward, and those relationships are critical to that.
Yeah, thank you for that question was in part designed to kind of emphasize a facet of your role here that's unique. Oftentimes when we do research and advocate for best practices, we're doing it in a fairly abstracted way. Well, you don't have that luxury. You're part of the very ecosystem on which we are doing our research and then opining on best practices. So I think in the spirit of drinking our own champagne, you are the best example of how our applied research makes it into the operations that underpin the Institute. So I think it's a really interesting place to be. I know you're looking for folks to join the team. And I know you and I are both here in part, maybe large part, because we want to be part of something greater than ourselves, right? So when I was in industry, it was fantastic. At the end of the day, we were making money for shareholders, which is wonderful. But it's not the same as defending the country, and defending the country from some of the most pressing threats that we face. So thoughts about the kind of folks that you're looking for and the kind of roles they'd fill here at the Institute.
Sure. Currently, we're looking for a user services consultant, and that is someone who will work with all of the end users. And we've talked mostly about the researchers being the people we use, but we also have people who are perhaps more novice with technology, because that's not necessarily their role. They're wonderful with accounting, maybe, and less familiar with all of these other kinds of research challenges or problems. And that's the role that they serve, and they have some unique needs as well. So the individuals who tend to be successful in the user services positions have a breadth of knowledge and are willing to learn and interact with people. And ideally, we can keep them here and those individuals can grow as well. So we recently brought over a network administrator who was previously in this role that I'm talking about now. And we have a wonderful Linux administrator as well who started in this role. And I myself was in the user services group some number of years ago when I joined the SEI. And that's one of the things I like about working here, is that you can constantly evolve and grow and expand your contributions. So those are the kinds of characteristics that really make somebody successful in that user services position. They're interested in working with people, interested in supporting the mission, and willing to take on a pretty broad, what do you have for me, how can I help kind of attitude. We're also looking for a DevOps Systems Administrator, and that's somebody who's going to support our DevOps pipeline, and they're responsible for supporting a number of business critical applications and working with the product teams. That person would ideally have those same kinds of attributes as well. Really being collegial is a primary attribute and area of interest for ours. And also somebody who is willing to and interested in growing continuous development.
And if anyone in the audience is interested, I'm sure there are folks that are interested. If they access the SEI website, they'll find these roles posted?
They will.
Okay.
Yeah. User Services Consultant and DevOps Systems Administrator.
Yeah, and I think we can't overemphasize this, that if you join the SEI, you become part of the federally funded Research and Development Center. You're also part of the larger university community. So I think it's a really interesting nexus of things, and that's, I think, one of the reasons I was attracted to working here. You mentioned the world changing, and we have a slightly different work posture than when you and I started here, and that we have flexible work arrangements. So we have folks that are in the office and then not in the office at times, depending on kind of role and need. From your vantage point as the director of IT, how have you seen the responsibilities or the needs that you're serving change with this more decentralized workforce?
The increased expectation of being able to connect to everything from everywhere has certainly been, I think, the biggest change that the pandemic has brought on. Fortunately, we were poised with some well-timed technology implementations that helped with that. Still, when it comes to our physical spaces, what are the expectations for those? What are the expectations for what kinds of things will be available from a mobile device? What's the presentation going to be like on that mobile device? So being able to provide access to everything, and also being to some degree platform agnostic. So if it's going to happen on Mac OS, on Windows. We're less the here's your Model T of a computer and
Yeah.
and here you go. So increased flexibility and allowing for additional choices has definitely been a big change in that time.
Yeah, just I want to really give credit where credit's due, which is we didn't even have a hiccup during the pandemic with access, right? So thanks to the hard work of you and your team, we were positioned to do remote access really well. You mentioned also that we have, a highly variable environment system-wise. When I arrived, one of the things I found really interesting was that it wasn't the homogenous, here's what you get, I was used to in a big corporation. And you really are needing to support those that have very particular and specific needs and highly demanding at times. So thanks again for allowing us to persist and thrive during the pandemic. I have just imagined, Craig, if the pandemic had happened 10 years before remote access was a little more exotic, I shudder to think what that would have done to productivity. So I think
it would have been
right.
a different and more substantial challenge. Yes.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the lessons that we should draw from this is resilience doesn't happen by accident. It happens by understanding the needs and then building specific capabilities. And that's the heart of a lot of the work that my group does here. But I think you live that. Your team needs to live that. So highly specialized area, demanding user base, part of the DIB. There's a lot of really interesting attributes to working here in IT. What does the future hold in your, if you had to look in your crystal ball for computing and maybe end user support? How does automation modify the way we work? So if we flash forward 5 years, what do you see as maybe changes on the horizon in the space?
I could definitely see an increase in the use of automated agents and an increased amount of self-service. So ideally, that kind of intelligence will bring a more frictionless experience to users. They can have more of what they specifically want and need faster.
Which is great, right? I mean, that is the goal after all. And I think that every wave of technology brings a certain set of concerns with it. One in particular I wanted to spend just a minute on is the cloud. You mentioned the cloud. So without exaggeration, the cloud is probably the most transformative IT shift we've seen in our careers. I speak for myself. Perhaps you agree. How has that influenced or colored what we do here at the SEI? The rise of the cloud as maybe the primary method by which we will store data and do compute and maybe even take on specific software as a service opportunities.
Oh, I agree with you that I believe it's probably the most transformative thing to come into IT and perhaps my IT career. It's, it's been great in a number of areas. So take, for example, something like Microsoft 365 or Google's G Suite or something where you can work collaboratively at the same time on a document with a colleague from a distance, those kinds of things, and being able to provide those. So we jumped into the cloud and all of a sudden the level of service just explodes that we could offer that we couldn't have done if that was all on premises. Those kinds of things are fantastic and wonderful, and they happen all at once. Some are a little more slow and deliberate, and sometimes there's benefit to being deliberate.
Yes.
So if you just rush into the cloud, then perhaps it's maybe not quite the cost savings that you expected that it would be. And we have seen some of that. In some regards, it can be beneficial to be a little bit of a laggard because other people can expose you to these problems, and you can kind of learn those lessons. So while I agree that it is transformative and wonderful and opens up a whole catalog of capabilities that would be very challenging for us to build on-prem that we can leverage when consumed as a service, you also have to be deliberate as well.
Yeah.
So I think you have to be, very, very deliberate about your choices.
Yeah, and the nature of the work that we do means that we'll be forward leaning, but also in the rational middle. Right, the kind of work we do doesn't permit us to be in the vanguard that takes risk in the ways that you might if you were in private industry, not focused on national defense, not part of this ecosystem we described.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I think
We can't always be on that bleeding edge.
exactly. So, but we
Yeah.
benefit from the lessons of others. I think that's
Right.
another really interesting facet of your role on your team is balancing innovation with the very specific and reasonable constraints we have around the way that we store data and access systems.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, Matt, because one of the things that can be challenging as a technologist, I see these things and read about these things, and I would love to jump right in and do the newest, coolest things. And sometimes we have to stand back and say, well, because of the customers that we have, because of the data that we are protecting, maybe that's not always the right choice. Some areas we have to be, and cloud can be marvelous for that. It might take a long time to procure equipment, set it up, configure it in such a way that we believe it's operationally ready, whereas we can just buy and consume that from a cloud service provider. There are other times where that's not the right choice.
Yeah, it's really striking that balance and doing it in a risk-informed way. I often ask people, and I hope you'll indulge me, Craig, today. What's the best thing about your job here at the SEI?
It's very clearly the people.
Yeah.
And when I first got here almost 20 years ago, I did not believe that I would be here for 20 years. I didn't know what I would be doing, but to stay at one place for that long, it's really about the people. And I've been provided opportunities to grow and evolve, and my colleagues have provided that. I've been able to be supported and to support others, and that's been marvelous. We talked about some of the positions that we have in IT earlier, and people progressing through the IT pipeline. So somebody that was in this user services consultant role is now a systems administrator. We've had people go into the research programs from IT. We've had people come from the research programs into IT. We've had people leave the SEI, go to the university, and then come back. So that kind of commitment to personal growth and support has been absolutely far and away the reason I've stayed.
Yeah, I agree. The people do make the difference. That sounds like a platitude, but nowhere has that been truer than here, in my experience. Also, when I first joined the SEI, I was told this is the most self-actualizing place for work. And it took me a few years to figure out exactly what that meant. But it's true, as you described, there's just many paths for a variety of, or all roles here, really, right? You described folks that are progressing within sort of their job function, those that then change job function, maybe come back. And that's really healthy. I think that exchange and that ability to grow and flex and pivot is really important for us. So another, I think, selling point for working here is that you have access to those options.
Yeah, and we tell people that join the team that you only get to be new once.
Yeah.
So when you're coming in and you bring that fresh perspective, we want to hear from you at that time. So in another environment, it might be just hold tight, learn the environment first, and then tell us. We want to hear from you straight away because you've got these fresh ideas that are just you're never going to have that kind of fresh perspective again. So that continues through people's tenure here as well. And I think we try to plant that seed early of you have contributions to make and we want you to make them. So we try to hire smart people and let them be smart.
Yeah, but we're not wanting for smart people. That's one of the best things about the SEI is it's a place full of smart people. And that's a real strength that we have. But smart people are often demanding when it comes to tech. So I think you've got a really interesting responsibility here within the SEI, and as I said, we certainly appreciate your willingness to collaborate and also being understanding of some of our unique needs. Undoubtedly, there's people in the audience today that are in similar roles. They're directors of IT or managers of IT or CIOs. I was hoping as our time ticks down here, maybe you could just offer one piece of advice for people that face this scenario where they have maybe emerging tech, a demanding user base, maybe just kind of one nugget of wisdom you can impart today, Craig, that maybe helps them with their responsibilities.
That what a challenging question.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it to be.
But it's a great question. It's challenging because it's a really great question. I think the piece of advice that I might offer is to have the conversation with the people making those requests And that conversation can inform you, well, why are they asking for it? Maybe they're demanding because the person that's asking for it is demanding it of them. So getting to learn more about what are the motivations for the people who are asking this. They probably didn't get out of bed and decide to make your life hard. Right? They have some need that needs to be met as well. So find out about their motivations and have those conversations. And there have been times where I might read about or learn about a request or some kind of activity happening, and my initial reaction is, what is that about? That seems silly or dangerous or something potentially negative. And then I'll learn more and I'll say, well, it's good that I bit my lip, because what they're asking for is it was me that was ill-informed, not the request.
Yeah, that is great advice. Thank you for sharing that. That's kind of starting with why principle. Most people are reasonable, and they're often motivated by other forces that make them seem less than reasonable. But if we all understand that we've got a shared obligation to protect the things that we operate, I think that's a great place to be. I mean, I know from my past experience, sometimes IT security appears to be the department of saying no, but that's not the objective. It's sometimes the byproduct if you don't get to those discussions about why.
Yeah. How can we do this in a sane and rational way that protects the entities and interests that we need to, yet allows the good work to happen?
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's really important that we all understand we have the same mission, and we're all partners in this, and that IT and researchers or whatever facet of the business you work in here at the SEI, we all have the same expectations placed upon us from our sponsors. So I really do think it comes down to mission. That's a differentiator, and people. And people that get the mission is the true differentiator here at the SEI, in my opinion. Would you agree?
Indeed, absolutely.
I think it's a great place to maybe end our discussion today, Craig, and encourage everyone to visit the SEI website, look at these roles and other roles that Craig has available, and in other parts of the Institute. Also, as always, there's a catalog of best practices and really good work that Craig's team and others consult when they're thinking about things like insider risk or other specialized topics. So thanks again for joining me today. I really appreciate it, and I hope you come back for a future episode of the Intersect.
Thanks, Matt. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.